Welcome to Elemental Energy, the podcast where we discuss how to simplify decarbonization. Here, we will introduce emerging low-carbon energy technologies and give you insight on how to navigate and support the evolving energy landscape. It is our goal to develop content to give you confidence to help transition the market and make low-carbon energy reliable and affordable. I'm your host, Marsha Leonard. Everybody, on today's episode, we are going to be talking about energy transformation to support the energy transition and resource sustainability. For those of you who don't know, I have 3 generations of oil and gas that runs through my blood. And this might sound really funny coming from somebody who has the title low carbon energy sector lead, but I truly believe that it's my responsibility to help support oil and gas, specifically the resource, and help bridge the mindset of the conventional energy provider with that of a different and alternative perspective. Well, come to think of it, I've been having conversations with many people in my industry, and it turns out that I'm not rare. Like a lot of seasoned oil and gas professionals actually have this mindset. And today, I am joined by one of those seasoned oil and gas professionals that shares my perspective. I have Doug Boyce, who is my peer, who has been in the industry for 23 years. He has a background as a project manager. He's been a consultant. He's worked with the majors such as Shell, BP. I mean, the guy knows oil and gas. It is truly, I believe, in his blood. He's developed scopes from initial feasibility studies he's supported to offshore, back to onshore, and everything in between, including subsea. So with that being said, Doug, welcome to Elemental Energy.
Yeah, thanks, Marsha. It's lovely to be here. Thank you for extending the invitation. And yeah, I share your passion around the traditional oil and gas industry. It's in my blood, and more so from where I grew up as well. It was the lifeblood, so to speak, of the economy in Trinidad and Tobago. And then obviously share that vision of energy transition, how we can do things better, sustainability, all those good things around where we're headed in the world today.
So, Doug, I'm definitely going to dig deeper into your ties to Trinidad and Tobago. But before we even get started with the episode, I really like to enlighten listeners with a couple of facts about climate change. So I'm going to put you in the hot seat, if that's okay, for just a minute.
Let's go for it. Yeah.
Okay. And we're going to do a round of Did You Know? So don't feel bad if you don't know, because really I ask these questions in hopes that a lot of people don't know to help enlighten them. Did you know that we are losing 1.2 trillion tons of ice each year due to temperatures rising?
I didn't know the amount, but I am aware that the ice caps are melting. And yes, there is an issue with rising sea levels. And again, coming from a small island, we saw effects of that. So yeah, very well aware of it. But thanks for the figure around it.
It's been speculated that since the 1990s, here's another figure, we have lost nearly 28 trillion tons of ice.
Wow. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying, to put that into perspective, like if you think of all the man-made items on the earth, 1.1 trillion tons is about what it's projected. That's a lot of ice.
Yeah, it's significant. And that has a massive impact, obviously, on the temperature of the earth, sea level, freshwater levels in terms of seawater and so on. So yeah, it's a staggering figure.
So sticking in the cold zone, did you know that ice and snow acts as a reflective tool to reflect heat from the earth?
Didn't know that specifically, but yeah, that would make sense. I mean, now that I live here in Toronto, and when it snows, I mean, you get this, this glare off of the snow that's blinding. So yeah, I can see how that can work.
Yeah, and then you think about black or darker surfaces absorbing heat, makes pretty good sense. And so ice and snow, they're actually components of what forms the cryosphere. And the cryosphere plays a huge part in regulating Earth's temperatures. And what happens to ice and snow when it gets hotter? it
It'll melt.
melts.
Yeah.
It melts.
Yeah.
So it's very important for us to recognize that what is going on, that we have an impact in stopping the heat generation, because that's going to continue. We're going to continue to lose ice and snow, and it's disrupting the cryosphere. All right, we're going to venture into some hotter territories. Did you know that in Saudi Arabia, they have a direct correlation with their work hours lost and the heat index over the last 20 years?
Didn't know that specifically, but again, that would make sense. I know it gets pretty hot and it's very difficult to work in that environment. So if it's getting hotter, yeah, it would affect productivity in a more substantial way.
And you think about what affecting productivity in one of the world's largest oil reserves looks like, who knows what kind of impact that has. And then on top of it, not only is there a correlation of the work hours lost, they have also recorded direct correlation with agricultural yield loss and temperatures.
Yeah, it's a significant impact across the whole spectrum of human life, if you like. Productivity, obviously crops and agriculture leads to food scarcity and security. So major impacts.
I think this is a really good segue when it comes down to talking about resource loss, to kind of introduce further about what's going on in Trinidad and Tobago.
I don't know how much you know of Trinidad and Tobago, but it's probably it's not a very well kept secret, I guess, in the oil and gas space. I mean, Trinidad and Tobago has a very, very long and impressive history in the oil and gas industry, over 100 years. The first oil well was drilled in Trinidad back in 1800s. I believe it might have been 1855 or 1856. With oil being produced in 1907. Trinidad as well, during World War II, was a significant asset for the UK Army to support their fleets with oil for the ships. So much so there was a massive presence of the British Army and the US Army during World War II. And then from independence in 1962, Trinidad has developed its own gas-based industry off of the oil. So it's been a significant economic enabler for the country over the since the 60s till now. So you're talking 60, 70 years of significant oil and gas production. So much so, Trinidad has been phenomenal in developing the resource along the whole value chain. So it started back in the late 60s, early 70s, with Amoco being in country, finding significant levels of oil. And along with that oil was this nuisance gas, natural gas at the time, which hadn't really made its impact on the world and its usage and so on. And very smart individuals in Trinidad, and a few of them you probably know through some of our acquaintances, came up with the idea to develop the Point Lisas industrial estate. So what they created was a demand for the natural gas, what they can use to monetize natural gas. So they created fertilizers, ammonia, urea. There's a steel mill that was installed or built back in the 80s as well, all requiring natural gas as a feedstock in some form or the other. Methanol grew very large, ammonia, and then LNG was huge for Trinidad and Tobago in the late 90s. The first train came on stream in 99. Second, third, and fourth trains up until 2004, 2005. So we've got a significant LNG business as well on top of methanol and ammonia. So much so, Trinidad was in the top 10 in methanol ammonia production, probably still is there in the world. But small economy, 1.3, 1.4 million people, it's significant. So long history there. It underpins the economy. Every year we listen to the national budget and everybody's waiting to hear what the Minister of Finance pegs the oil price at, because our revenue and expenditure for the country is pegged on the price of oil. And by extension, it translates loosely to the price of gas as well. And that's how the whole budget is built and executed during the financial year. So it's a very significant part of the economy in Trinidad and Tobago. More so even in the manufacturing. So when you look at natural gas as an enabler as well, and this is what's really amazing about these natural resources and why we still need them. We use natural gas power generation in Trinidad and Tobago since the 70s, 80s. So Trinidad has been on natural gas and power generation for a very, very long time. So we're in that low carbon space, if you like, already in power generation. Of course, it can always be improved. But what that allowed the government, and it still do as well, is that electrical power generated from natural gas is subsidized. So what that's allowed Trinidad to do is develop a very strong manufacturing sector. So it allows manufacturers a cheap input into the processing of their end products, whether it's food manufacturing, building manufacturing products, things like that. So it's been that enabler for the economy. So that's to tell you how dependent Trinidad and Tobago is on natural gas. Oil has kind of gone a little bit to the smaller side because the volumes we produce just aren't significant when you compare it to the Middle East, Canada, Russia, the US. So
Venezuela.
It really doesn't impact that much. Natural gas is where it's at for Trinidad and Tobago. So very significant impact there for the country. And the challenge we've had over the last 5 to 10 years now, and it's going on, is that the amount of natural gas being produced is falling. I'm not sure how familiar, I should rephrase that. Obviously, all your listeners do have a very strong oil and gas background. Quite a few of them will have that and understand the decline rates in reservoirs, more so in gas, and some reservoirs decline a lot faster than the others. So you spend a lot of time and effort trying to maintain production levels and also increase that and increase reserves so you can bring on more gas. But what's happening is that we're not being able to keep up with the decline rates of the reservoirs. So we have declining production, which obviously impacts into what we can put into LNG. So significant enough that Atlantic has 4 trains installed, and they're now down to 3 trains. So they've had to curtail one of them for the lack of gas. A few of the methanol plants and a few of the ammonia plants have had to shut down because of the lack of natural gas to support operations. And on top of that, it's also becoming more expensive to produce. The gas is in smaller volumes. It's kind of in that point of where it's maybe considered stranded gas as well. So it makes it a little bit more expensive, a little more difficult to produce. So it's been a escalation of challenges to try and keep the industry going, keep it significant, and also now try and diversify the economy away from that natural gas resource.
So I'm just going to ask this as simply as possible: is Trinidad and Tobago is running out of natural gas as a resource, is what you just said?
It depends. Some people say half glass full. It's there. We just got to find it. Others may say, yes, we are running out. For me, I'm not a geologist. We don't have insight into the particulars around, the lease areas that the IOCs and so on own and operate. So from where I sit, in my opinion, is it appears we are running out of it. To me, natural gas or any resource locked in the ground isn't going to help a country or help a business. It's got to be able to be discovered, produced, used, and processed, and then put out there and be sold to be able to realize its value. If it's in the ground unfound, then there's no value to it. So yes, I would say it's running pretty scarce.
So this is a concept that I was going to talk about towards the end of this podcast, but I think it's really important to bring it up now. My dear Dad, it's amazing the insight that you can gain by asking questions to people who've been in the industry a while. And I asked him, I was like, Dad, do you think that we will ever run out of gas and oil? And he's like, you know what, Marcia, we won't, because what's going to happen is the price and the economics are going to reflect the scarcity, because the means of obtainment are going to become more difficult, and it's going to automatically price itself out of being a resource for people to utilize. What do you think about that concept? Because you kind of just touched on it.
He's spot on. We're seeing it like in Trinidad. You see it in other regions where there's a very active oil and gas industry, extractive industry. It even goes into minerals. And as soon as that, I don't want to kind of downplay it too much, but that easy resource is finished and you start getting a little more challenging around exploration and production of that resource, the price is going to go up to produce that compared to other locations globally. So you've got competing jurisdictions where it's cheaper to produce natural gas, oil, other minerals, gold, lithium, those sort of things, versus, say, Trinidad, where natural gas is now becoming a little bit harder to find, a little harder to produce. So that means it's a little bit more expensive. And then the other challenge we have in Trinidad, I mean, some people may say we are awash in gas, and we are. There's a significant amount of gas reserves globally. But the problem Trinidad has, it's all geared towards exploration, production, processing, export. We can't import gas to supply our local industry because that's where it now becomes very expensive. So Trinidad is in that crux where it's difficult because we need the natural resource to be competitive, but we have to be able to produce natural resource ourselves or we're not going to be competitive. So that's the other challenge around an industry around a single natural resource. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes brilliant sense. And that's kind of where we could take it up to a positive mindset now, and a positive aspect of the energy transition is what's going on to support these resources. In my mind, how I look at the energy transition is we can bring in different technologies now to create energy security. Like the one that comes to my mind in this instance is hydrogen. What do you think about the introduction of hydrogen into an economy like Trinidad and Tobago? Do you think that will help when it comes down to this shift of the entire economy that needs to happen?
Or it'll be significant. I mean, the main use of natural gas in the ammonia and methanol process is to extract that hydrogen to be used in the process to produce the ammonia and the methanol. So it's significant. So if we can replace the supply of hydrogen from natural gas and replace that, say, from a renewable resource, electrolysis is what would come to mind, then that would breathe new life into the industry. We don't need natural gas per se to support the petrochemical sector that we have in Trinidad and Tobago. Once we can extract that hydrogen from a resource, a sustainable resource, then that will solve our problem. So what we're seeing in Trinidad, and I've been supporting quite a bit, there's a local entity that's put forward a project, the NewGen project in Trinidad and Tobago. They have proposed a green hydrogen facility to produce hydrogen from electrolysis to be fed straight into the demand center of the ammonia and the methanol facilities in Point Lisa. So it's a project that's well under the way. I think they're into FEED right now. And then that will move in, obviously, to the FID and then detailed design and execute. So it's on the drawing board. It's happening. It's one of the larger hydrogen electrolysis facilities globally on the drawing board as well. So it's going to be interesting to see that when they move it forward. It's also going to be maybe a bit of a model that other countries, other jurisdictions can kind of follow to understand how we can make it work. So something's happening and hopefully it comes to fruition sooner than later.
Okay, I'm super curious. What are the renewable resources to hook onto the electrolyzers look like? Are they looking at solar, onshore wind, offshore wind? Do you
right
know?
Now, there's initially solar is going to be the main supply of power into the electrolysis facility. There's 2 solar facilities being built by BP Lightsource. It's a consortium of BP Lightsource and Shell on one. And I think the other one is a BP project, BP Lightsource on its own. So around 140 megawatt type size PV facility. So that's one. And then the other one, I think, is a little bit smaller, about 80, 90 megawatts. But that will be fed into the grid, and then that will be used to provide the NewGen facility with the power for the electrolyzers.
Your overall opinion on, like I mentioned, I like to call it the energy transformation instead of the energy transition, because what we are doing and what we are talking about here is supporting oil and gas. We have to transform some of our ways of operating in order to sustain the resources that are currently out there. What does your vision look like over the next couple of years for oil and gas specifically to be adapting these new technologies? And does it make you excited about these new technologies to support oil and gas?
Yeah, I'm massively excited. I mean, it's like when you and I spoke last week, I mean, oil and gas, in my opinion, is a finite resource. I think your dad nailed it on the head in terms of the economics will probably lead to the lack of use of oil and gas in the future in the next 40, 50, 60 years. I think what we can do as we transform from burning fuels in vehicles to transport, we transition that into EVs, potentially hydrogen for long haul and freight and so on. We're offsetting that demand for hydrocarbons with something else. We're using electricity, which is probably the most efficient form of energy we can produce and use to kind of take care of our day-to-day tasks, repetitive tasks. And we'll eventually go down that whole value chain where we will replace the oil and gas component in quite a few things. It frustrates me quite a bit when I go on to LinkedIn, and I think of LinkedIn as a very professional network, and you see some of the comments from the oil and gas advocates and even from the energy transition advocates, and they're just at each other. It's a little bit silly. It's a transition. It's not going to happen overnight. We're using over 100 million barrels of oil a day to live as humanity on this world. And we're going to need that. We have a growing population, global population that demands more and more energy. Not only that, the existing population, there are quite a few folks who don't have access to power. And that's the other thing we need to understand as well. The transformation is going to help those areas that don't have access to traditional fossil fuel power generation. It's going to improve their lives, the quality of their lives. I think for us, we'll always see oil and gas in products that we use and the clothes we wear, the pharmaceuticals. It'll have a presence. We'll slowly replace all of that. But what we're doing is stretching that ability to use that resource out in maybe those more critical areas than burning it in a car going to the movie on a Saturday night, say. So I'm excited. I think we've got to do this. It makes good sense from climate, from practicality, from energy security, cost, etc. Every reason is pointing, let's do this.
Doug, I couldn't have said it better. Like, the smile on my face is so real because I thought I was kind of a rarity with this mindset of meeting in the middle because I had been exposed to that same kind of group of people and individuals. But as I'm digging further and further and recognizing that there is such a movement to support this mindset and this thought, it makes me so happy to know that there are others out there who see the benefit of it. And it's not the completely left and the completely right, but we're merging to come to a mutual agreement to say that this is okay. Like, we've got to march in this direction because climate change, it has been proven that we as humans are having an impact on our climate from CO2 emissions. And that's something that we can stop. So why would we not stop it is the question that I keep asking my peers. And everybody's like, well, if we can, why don't we? And I'm like, exactly. If there's other technologies out there that can uphold this, like hydrogen and nuclear that are up and coming, why would we not?
Yeah, Marshall, the other thing around it is that energy security side of things. So growing up in Trinidad and Tobago, we were lucky we had gas. So Trinidad and Tobago has one of the highest efficiencies in terms of electrical power to households and so on, and a very stable supply. But then you look at the small islands, small economies, small populations, and they're struggling to pay the light bill literally because they've got to import this fossil fuel that is subject to market conditions, geopolitical, environmental, just market demands and so on. So it goes up, it goes down, and it really hurts these small economies. So what I love about the energy transition is that energy security. I listened to your podcast the other day on the SMR technology as well. And I'm thinking of small islands that I grew up in, Barbados, St. Lucia, Antigua, Grenada. SMR would be a fantastic solution for these small islands because it's scalable, it's a manageable cost, it's not then subject to market influence in terms of price increases, availability, those sort of things. So people have to step back as well and say, right, I've got lights on 99% of the time, but there are people who don't, and then people who pay extremely high amounts for power on a day-to-day basis. I'll tell you something, living in Trinidad and Tobago is a gas-based economy. I used to sit down there and say, I hope winter's pretty tough for those folks up there. So the price of gas goes up. Trinidad does well, but that's a little bit selfish of me because people need gas for heat. But I'm only looking at it from my lens that we need the revenue from gas to make Trinidad a better place. But take a step back, think of the end users, think to what's happening in other jurisdictions. And yeah, this is where the energy transition, if not for carbon, and you don't believe we're affecting the climate, which I think probably need to take your head out of the sand a little bit, then just from the fact of energy security, quality of life, raising people out of poverty, raising that, overall life expectancy, all those good things that come along with having resources available. Think about that and what the energy transition is now offering. It's amazing.
I want to further that conversation too, because what you are addressing right now is what we call in the industry ESG, environmental, social, and governance. That is the aspect where these larger companies like Shell and BP and all of the majors, they're having this very fine line of, do we fully convert into that ESG mindset and support others and elevate others and raise them, or the dollar bills? They're still the ones that are paying paychecks to people who are in this. So it is not an easy or a fast transition that has to occur, but large corporations are adopting an ESG mindset. It's been seen across the board in the energy industry that is becoming a very large, for customers to want to work with us, for example, is if we don't have ESG standards in place when it comes down to working with Indigenous engagement and other rural or impoverished places, or what am I trying to say here? Populations.
Yeah.
Like we have to adopt the ESG mindset because it is about protecting other people. And for people in our positions who have been afforded the luxuries, we have a responsibility to share that with others.
Yeah, it's also an opportunity for people like ourselves to give back. I mean, through the corporations that have that global presence. And also for me as a consumer, so you're buying a phone, you're buying a car, you're buying furniture, many different manufacturers, many different choices. So then you start to wonder, what other value can I get from buying this product? So if your company has a strong ESG policy strategy that's demonstrable, measurable, I feel I get a little bit more value for investing in that company and their products because of what they're doing by extension. So it's not just pushing out a cheap product for me to use, just worrying about themselves, but they've got a wider picture, which I think helps us as individuals look beyond just our own four walls and just say, there's a world outside there some people have and some people don't have, and we have to kind of balance it at the end of the day.
I'm a firm believer in sharing wealth, and thankfully you listened to the last podcast where it's, if we are going to use energy in abundance to go out and dance and have fun and listen to music and do things like that, I truly believe it's our responsibility to share that and do it in a sustainable way. So Doug, I could continue to have a conversation like this with you all day, but I want you to have a moment to directly connect with our audience. You think about our audience, they're conventional mindsets that are trying to shift into the energy transition, and they might be a little bit nervous about it because it's very overwhelming. And then there are already the movers who are in the energy transition, and they're just trying to gain a little bit more knowledge. But what would you like to say to that audience and to our listeners?
First thing I'd say, this is going to be a journey. It's not an overnight. So there's a lot of urgency around climate change and meeting that 1.5 target, which I think has a lot of people on edge, and a lot of people maybe just thinking a little bit too crazy, if you like, but it's going to be a journey. I think anybody in the oil and gas industry has nothing to worry about. My son is 12 years old. If you wanted to get in the oil and gas industry, I'd say, son, go for it. It's been the most rewarding industry. I've had a massively fantastic time there. I still have a few years left in my career, and hopefully I'll get the opportunity to spend more time in that sector. The other thing as well is the folks who put down the energy transition is expensive, it doesn't make sense, the technology doesn't work. Bear in mind, we're still new at this. We're still developing the technology. Look at offshore wind, for instance. Well, first of all, it started onshore wind, small turbines, 2-3 megawatts. Went offshore, it's going deeper offshore where the foundations are getting bigger, support bigger turbines. So we're now up to 12, 15 megawatt turbines. So now the cost per megawatt hour is coming down because you can now install these offshore wind developments more cost competitively. We're looking at floating wind. Floating wind still probably another 3 to 5 years to be commercialized, where you can really unlock the wind resource. You look at PV, solar. You now have bifacial solar panels that's increased the efficiency. I'm not sure the actual amount, but exponentially increase the efficiency of solar panels that you can put on your roof, the solar farms, etc. Battery technology, it's improving. SMR that we spoke about, not commercialized yet, but we're getting there. The other thing that kind of boggles my mind a little bit in that locked-in mindset people have is the world is built around oil and gas as an energy source. Everything that we do, that we use, has a tie back to oil and gas. So you've got to understand we've had maybe 150 years of oil and gas, building a world around it with infrastructure, industry, products that are all based on this one resource, fossil fuels, that we're trying to wean ourselves off of. It's going to take time. It's going to take a massive effort. And I think you've got these, again, people who downcry EV vehicles, or what's the carbon footprint? What's that? I think the expectation that people think that an EV is going to be 100% green because it's an electric vehicle. It's got to be produced from the natural gas oil base to start. And eventually, as the supply chain back ends into it, until you start getting your supply chain greening more and creating products more from alternative sources, that you start getting more, I guess, greener products at the end of the day. So eventually we will reach that full zero carbon electric vehicle, but it'll take time. This is how it's going to start. It starts with, what I'd like to say, the low-hanging fruit, power generation. We can manage power generation, and then we electrify. So we electrify as much as possible, as much as we can. And then you take it into heavy transport, you take it into the mining side of it, you take it into the processing side of things. So it's going to happen, but it'll take time. There's plenty space for everybody on both sides of the fence. And hopefully very soon there's no fence, that we're all working collectively together to make this thing happen. But I think it's a fantastic future for both industries, because oil and gas is evolving. They're carbon conscious, along obviously cost conscious. So that makes them a very efficient, very good at problem solving and solving that carbon problem. And then you've got energy transition side with the renewables, where there's sustainability, cost driven, and the security side of things as well. So these similar drivers are creating options for us at the end of the day that are going to provide the solutions that we're looking for.
Doug, we are so lucky to have you in the industry.
Thanks.
I mean, to have that mindset and the way that you just laid it out, it just continues to give me hope that we will achieve the removing of the fence and tearing down the fence, of coming together, working together, and figuring out that this is a journey that we're all on, and just accepting a different way of thinking sometimes. So
yeah, no, definitely. We've been through this as humanity in the past. I mean, one picture comes to mind. I remember seeing, I don't know how true it is, there's a picture of New York with horse-driven buggies and so on. And then 15 years later, and it says, spot the car among all the horse buggies and so on. And then there's a shot 10, 15 years later, same street with only cars, and says, spot the horse buggy. That's where we are. So we're still seeing all the oil and gas around us. It's difficult to spot the windmills and turbines and so on. But maybe in 10, 15 years' time, there's a transition. But it's transition, and it's helped us, humanity, improve quality of life, efficiency, productivity, all these sort of things. So embrace it. I think it's a phenomenal change.
So everybody listening, I know I speak for both Doug and myself. If you are passionate about this, or you want to have more information or knowledge, connect with both of us. We're both on LinkedIn. You can find us, reach out to us. And as always, I hope that you have a safe weekend, but most importantly, a happy one. Generate your own happiness and take it into the weekend. And Doug, thank you so much for joining me on Elemental Energy. I appreciate it.
No, thanks for having me, Marsha. It's great to be able to share ideas and common thoughts and so on. And yeah, you could probably tell I'm quite enthusiastic, based on where I can go, like I say, oil and gas to me, or renewables. I love that opportunity in front of me, and so I'm excited. And hopefully that came across in the conversation today.
Thank you all so much for listening today. If you enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe so you're notified every time a podcast is released. Find Elemental Energy on Facebook and connect with me, Marsha Leonard, on LinkedIn. But lastly, and most importantly, share this podcast with your family and your friends, especially if you are in the energy industry and you're having an influence on the path of decarbonization. I'm on this journey figuring things out, and I want you guys to come along. So the closer I can get to you and the more I can connect with you, the better this show will be and become. It truly gives me hope and affirmation to have other people out there.
It's a journey that's going to take 10, 15, 20, 30 years. Yeah, I mean, in Trinidad, again, you've got cost recovery models where an IOC will come in and do exploration. And if they don't find anything, they can offset the cost of that exploration well against their profits and so on. So they're not, in a sense, losing anything per se. And then there's cost recovery when they develop a field and start producing and so on. It's just, you've got the incentives to do it. So why can't these new energies, these new industries have these incentives as well? So I think people need to accept that, understand that people need this, not only from the point of view of, revenues and so on, but just quality of life, just improving things.
Well, I'm glad that we found it, because I think that's what's making us help lead us into the energy transition, is with the mindset that we do have and trying to enlighten others about.
It's an absolutely amazing industry. Some of the things technologically we've done is amazing, but then I'm excited about getting involved in the renewable sector, mostly in offshore wind, because I love being offshore in that part of the industry. It's exciting as hell, and just being a part of something new. And I mean, my age, nearly 30 years in industry now, and just excited about going into a new industry potentially is I feel like a kid again. So yeah, I mean, I wish I had another 20 years of career life behind me or something like that to look forward to, but I'll try to make the most of it. But yeah, it's something people should really open up to and embrace.